Chapter 1. The Weight of Silence. The scent of lemon polish and old promises clung to the air in the great hall, a scent Anya knew better than her own. Her reflection stared back from the glossy floorboards, a ghost in a gray tunic, all sharp angles and muted colors. She moved with a practiced rhythm, her cloth whispering across the wood, erasing the scuffs and footprints of people who never saw her. Her goal was simple, so simple. Be invisible. Disappear into the grain of the wood, the motes of dust dancing in the moonlight. Don't make a sound. Don't draw an eye. Survive. A ripple of laughter, sharp and cruel as shattered glass, cut through her concentration. Anya's shoulders tightened instantly. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Lyra. The Alpha's daughter, radiant and venomous, stood with her court of sycophants, a goblet of deep red wine held delicately in her hand. "Oh, look," Lyra purred, her voice carrying across the cavernous space. "It's still here. I thought we'd swept out all the trash this morning." The others tittered. Anya kept her eyes down, her world shrinking to the swirling patterns in the oak beneath her hands. Don't react. Don't give her the satisfaction. Because a reaction was a currency she couldn't afford to spend. A flinch, a tear, a single word of defiance. Each would be purchased with a week of cold meals or a night in the cellar. Lyra took a deliberate step forward. The rich, velvety scent of the wine grew stronger, a cloying perfume of privilege. With a flick of her wrist, a crimson arc sailed through the air. It landed with a sickening splash right in the center of the floor Anya had just perfected. Splat. The red bled into the wood like a fresh wound. Silence followed, thick and expectant. Anya's knuckles were white where she gripped the rag. Every muscle screamed at her to stay still, to become stone. "Oops," Lyra said, her tone anything but apologetic. "Clumsy me? Clean it up, Omega. That's what you're good for, isn't it?" Slowly, so slowly, Anya crawled toward the spill. The laughter started again, louder this time. The sound scraped against her soul, but her face remained a placid mask. This was her life, a tapestry woven from small cruelties and quiet endurances. As she soaked up the sticky liquid, the smell of fermented grapes filling her nose, a different presence knelt beside her. She flinched, expecting a kick. Instead, a gnarled hand, warm and papery, gently touched her shoulder. It was old Alara, a she-wolf whose mate had passed seasons ago. "Pay them no mind, little one," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. Her scent was of chamomile and earth, a stark contrast to Lyra's sharp perfume. Alara pressed something small and smooth into Anya's palm, a river stone worn featureless by time. "You have a gift, a light they can't comprehend. Don't ever let them steal it." Anya's fingers closed around the stone, its coolness a balm against her burning shame. She risked a glance at the old wolf. Alara's eyes, clouded with age, held a deep, knowing sorrow. What gift? The question was a silent, desperate plea. Before she could ask, Alara was gone, melting back into the pack. But the stone remained. A secret, a promise, a tiny, smooth anchor in an ocean of contempt. She finished cleaning the wine, the weight of the stone in her pocket a strange and unfamiliar comfort, a question that now echoed in the hollows of her heart. Chapter 2. Sanctuary and a Distant Howl. The pack hall was a cage of polished wood and judging eyes. The forest was freedom. Here, under the deep green canopy, Anya could finally breathe. The air tasted of damp earth, of pine needles, of life itself. This was her true home, a sprawling sanctuary of tangled roots and whispering leaves that asked nothing of her but to exist. Her bare feet knew the path by heart, moving silently over moss and fallen logs. Her fingers, stained with polish just an hour ago, now brushed against the velvety leaves of a lungwort plant. She wasn't just the pack's servant here. She was something more. Her bag was already half full with herbs, yarrow for fevers, willow bark for pain, the chamomile that old Ilara loved. Her mother had taught her the language of the forest before everything. It was the one piece of her past they hadn't been able to take. But she wasn't just gathering. Deeper in, where the trees grew thick and the shadows lay like sleeping beasts, she stopped. The air grew still. Her purpose shifted. Her breathing deepened. Her posture changed. She wasn't a timid omega anymore. She dropped into a low stance, her body coiling with a strength no one in the pack would ever believe she possessed. She moved. It was a silent, desperate dance she'd taught herself through years of watching the pack warriors train from the shadows. A parry, a block, a swift jab at an invisible enemy. She fought the memory of a guard's rough hands. She dodged the specter of Lyra's sneer. She struck at the phantom of her own fear. Here, she wasn't a survivor. She was a fighter. Every movement was a promise to herself. One day, I will be free. It was in the midst of this silent battle that the sound came. A howl. It wasn't the familiar, almost casual call of her pack. No, this was different. It rolled through the forest from miles away, a sound so deep and resonant it vibrated in her bones. It was impossibly ancient, filled with a sorrow that mirrored her own, and a power that stole the breath from her lungs. It spoke of lonely thrones and heavy crowns, of a burden carried for centuries. Her practice forgotten, she stood frozen, listening. And then, something impossible happened. A strange hum ignited beneath her skin, a faint, dormant energy stirring in her blood. It was like a forgotten song being played on a distant string, a vibration that only she could feel. It recognized the howl. It answered it, in a way she couldn't comprehend. What was that? The strange feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating. It was a hint of the gift Ilara had spoken of, a secret part of her she had long suppressed, believing it to be a curse. The howl faded, leaving an echo not in the air, but inside her very soul. She stood trembling in the sudden silence of the forest, the wild, lonely call of a distant king branding itself onto her heart. Chapter 3. The King is Coming. The summons came an hour later. The Alpha's call, a sharp, commanding howl that demanded the presence of every pack member. Anya's brief sense of freedom evaporated, replaced by the familiar cloak of dread. She slipped into the great hall, now clean and gleaming, and found a place along the back wall trying to blend in with the tapestries. The air was electric, thick with a nervous energy she hadn't felt in years. Wolves shifted on their feet, murmuring in low voices. At the head of the hall, on his carved wooden throne, sat Alpha Valerius. He was a brute of a man, with a beard like tangled briars and eyes as cold as river stones. Beside him, Lyra preened, her smug smile a slash of red in her pale face. She was convinced this meeting was about her. "My pack!" Valerius's voice boomed, silencing the whispers. "I have news that will change the fate of the Black Moon pack forever." He let the words hang in the air, savoring the drama. "In 3 days, on the night of the full moon, we will host the mating ceremony." A wave of excitement rippled through the younger wolves. Anya felt nothing. Ceremonies like this were not for her. They were for wolves like Lyra, beautiful and cruel, who would be offered up like prizes. "But this is no ordinary ceremony," Valerius continued, his eyes sweeping the room. "We will be honored by the presence of a guest, the Alpha King himself, King Rhys of the Silver Throne." A collective gasp went through the hall. The Alpha King, a figure of myth and legend, a king so powerful he hadn't needed to visit a subordinate pack in decades. Why now? Why them? Fear, sharp and metallic, began to lace the air. Lyra, however, looked ecstatic. She ran a hand down her silken dress, her gaze flicking between the pack's most handsome guards as if to say, "He's coming for me." Anya just wanted it to be over. She wanted to slip away, back to the woods, back to the memory of that strange, powerful howl. Valerius's cold gaze landed on the polished floorboards, and then, with unerring cruelty, it found her. His lip curled in disdain. "Our home must be spotless for the king's arrival, a testament to the strength and order of my pack." He pointed a thick finger directly at Anya, making her the center of 100 pairs of eyes. "The Omega will see to it. From top to bottom, she will not rest until this hall shines like glass." The world tilted. The weight of his command, of every eye in the hall, pressed down on her, suffocating her. It wasn't just an order. It was a public declaration, a reminder of her place. "You are nothing. You are the dirt beneath our feet." She lowered her head, the heat of shame crawling up her neck, her mother's last words echoing in her mind. "Be strong, little one. Your blood is a river, not a puddle." But in that moment, she felt like nothing more than a puddle, about to be evaporated by the heat of a king's gaze. Chapter 4: The Scent of Truth. The great hall thrummed with a nervous energy that felt like a gathering storm. Anya moved along the edges of the room, a ghost refilling goblets and clearing away plates of half-eaten food. The air was a thick cocktail of scents: roasting boar, spiced wine, and the 100 different notes of the pack, from anxious to arrogant. She kept her eyes down, her senses overwhelmed, her entire being focused on the single goal of being utterly forgettable. Then, the heavy oak doors swung open, and silence fell. He didn't stride in like a conqueror. He entered like the tide, a quiet, inexorable force that commanded the room without a sound. King Rhys was not the brute she had imagined. He was tall and lean, dressed in simple dark leathers that did little to hide the raw power coiled in his frame. But it was his face that held her captive. It was a mask of weary control, his features handsome but etched with a profound exhaustion. His eyes, they were the color of old gold, and they held the weight of centuries. The howl from the forest. It was him. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow, and the strange hum in her blood stirred in recognition. Alpha Valerius puffed out his chest, a lesser beast trying to stand tall before a lion. "King Rhys, welcome to Black Moon." Rhys gave a slight, formal nod, his gaze sweeping the room with a polite disinterest that felt more insulting than any sneer. Then came Lyra. She moved toward him like a viper in silk, her smile dazzling and utterly fake. "Your Majesty," she breathed, dipping into an exaggerated curtsy. "We are so honored." He looked at her, truly looked, and Anya saw a flicker of something in his golden eyes. Assessment, and then dismissal. It was subtle, but it was there. "Alpha Valerius's daughter, I presume," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Lyra's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "I am," she said, recovering quickly, "and I hope you find our hospitality to your liking." "I'm sure I will," he replied, his gaze already moving on, scanning the faces of the pack. Searching. For what? The rejection, however quiet, was a public slap. Lyra's face flushed a dangerous shade of red. Her fury, having nowhere else to go, found its favorite target. Her eyes locked on Anya. With a vicious hiss, she deliberately knocked a heavy silver goblet from a nearby table. It hit the stone floor with a deafening clang, denting on impact. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. "Clean that! Now, on your knees! Show the king how we deal with worthless things." The room held its breath. It was a test of power, a petty display for a slighted ego. Humiliation washed over Anya in a cold, sickening wave. She had no choice. She sank to her knees, the rough stone biting into her skin, and reached for the fallen cup. As her fingers closed around the cool metal, she felt it. A gaze, intense, unwavering. She slowly lifted her head, and her eyes met the king's. He wasn't looking at Lyra, or her father, or anyone else. He was looking directly at her. And there was no pity in his eyes, no disgust. There was only a burning, world-shattering question. Chapter 5. A King's Kindness. The feast was finally over. The last of the drunken laughter had faded, leaving behind a graveyard of bones and spilled wine. Silence, blessed and absolute, settled over the great hall. It was in these quiet, lonely hours that Anya felt most herself. She worked methodically, collecting tarnished silver and stacking greasy plates, her movements slow and deliberate in the echoing emptiness. The king and the alphas had retired to discuss politics, leaving her to clean up their excess. It was always her job to clean up the excess. She reached for the shards of a crystal goblet Lyra had smashed in a fit of pique earlier in the evening. A smaller, sharper cruelty that had gone mostly unnoticed. A sliver of glass nearly invisible in the moonlight sliced deep into the palm of her hand. Anya hissed, dropping the pieces with a clatter. Blood, dark and immediate, welled up from the cut. It was a stupid mistake, a careless injury born from exhaustion. She squeezed her hand, trying to staunch the flow, a familiar frustration tightening her chest. "Are you all right?" The voice came from the shadows. Deep. Calm. The same voice that had rumbled through the hall hours before. Anya's heart leaped into her throat. She spun around, her injured hand held protectively to her chest, her body instantly tensing for a blow. King Rhys stood by the massive stone hearth, watching her. He hadn't left. Why hadn't he left? Her mind raced. To be alone with an alpha is danger. To be alone with the Alpha King is a death sentence. Her only goal was to flee, to make herself small and vanish. But he didn't move toward her with aggression. He stepped into the moonlight, his expression unreadable, and his golden eyes were fixed on the blood dripping between her fingers. "You're hurt," he stated, not a question, but a fact. She took a stumbling step back, her back hitting a wooden table. "I'm fine, Your Majesty. It's nothing." Her voice was a pathetic whisper. He ignored her words. He closed the distance between them in 2 silent strides. He was so much taller up close, a mountain of quiet power. He smelled of pine and cold night air and something else. Something wild and ancient. Anya flinched, expecting him to grab her, to punish her for her clumsiness. Instead, he simply held out his hand. "Let me see." It wasn't a command. It was a request, spoken with a gentleness that shattered all her defenses. No alpha had ever spoken to her like that. Confused, terrified, and utterly mesmerized, she slowly, hesitantly uncurled her fingers and placed her bleeding hand in his. His grasp was warm and surprisingly soft. The moment their skin touched, the hum ignited in her blood again. Not faint this time, but a powerful thrumming chord of energy that sang between them. His breath hitched. He lifted her hand closer, his head bent, and inhaled softly against her skin. His head snapped up. His golden eyes widened, blazing with a sudden, shocking intensity. He wasn't smelling a scentless omega. He wasn't smelling her blood. He was smelling her soul. Chapter 6. The True Blood Secret. He didn't let go. His grip on her hand tightened, not painfully, but with a sense of finality, of discovery. "Come with me," he murmured, his voice low and urgent. Before Anya could protest, he was leading her away from the wreckage of the feast, out of the great hall and through a side door she'd only ever used to take out the trash. The cool night air was a shock to her senses. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and a wild, inexplicable curiosity. What did he want? What had he smelled? He led her to a secluded stone balcony that overlooked the dark, sleeping forest. The moon hung fat and silver in the sky, bathing them in its ethereal light. He finally released her hand and turned to face her. The weariness was gone from his eyes, replaced by an intensity that pinned her in place. "Don't look at me like they do," he said, his voice raw. "Don't look at the king. Look at me." It was a plea. He was asking for something she hadn't willingly shown another soul since she was a child. He was asking for her gift. Trembling, she did as he asked. She let the walls down. She stopped seeing the Alpha King and allowed her senses, her true senses, to perceive him. The golden light of his aura was immense, powerful, but it was frayed, tainted with shadows. She could feel a creeping coldness, a sickness deep in his bloodline, a slow, patient poison that was dimming his light from the inside out. She saw his pain, his loneliness, the crushing weight of a crown he wore not out of ambition, but out of a desperate sense of duty. "You see it, don't you?" he whispered, his voice laced with a terrible, fragile hope. "The curse?" Anya could only nod, her throat tight. "My bloodline is dying," he confessed, the words torn from him. "Each generation grows weaker. The magic fades. I am the last of my line who can even hold the throne, and this sickness, it is killing me." Slowly, he took a step closer, his golden eyes pleading with her. "For 50 years I have searched. My father before me, his father before him. We have searched for a whisper, a legend. We have searched for a true blood Omega." The words hit her like a physical blow. True blood, the name for her curse. The secret she had spent her entire life hiding, pretending to be a scentless, worthless Omega to avoid the fear and hatred that came with that title. How? How could he know? "Only a true blood can see the truth of a soul," he continued, his voice dropping to a desperate murmur. "Only a true blood can heal what is broken in our blood. Only a true blood can save my line and my people. I knew you were here. I felt you the moment I crossed the border. A light in the darkness." He reached out, his fingers gently brushing her cheek. "You are the one I have been searching for." Her world shattered. Everything she had ever known, every lie she had ever told to survive, had just been ripped away. She was exposed, vulnerable. Stunned into silence, her mind reeled, trying to process the impossible truth. As she stared at him, a flicker of movement in the gardens below caught her eye. A shadow detached itself from a hedge. It was one of her Alpha's guards. He had been watching them. As their eyes met for a split second, the guard turned and melted back into the darkness, racing to report what he had seen. The secret was out, and the danger was no longer a phantom from her past. It was here, now, and closing in fast. Chapter 7. A Conspiracy of Whispers. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Anya. The guard was gone. The secret was out. Rhys grabbed her arm, his touch a grounding force in the swirling chaos of her mind. "We have to move. Now." He pulled her from the moonlit balcony, his regal calm replaced by a stark urgency that spoke of imminent danger. They moved through shadowed corridors, his long strides forcing her into a near run. He didn't lead her to the safety of his chambers, but down a winding staircase into the belly of the pack house, to a place of dust and forgetting, the archives. He shut the heavy door behind them, the sound echoing in the cramped space. The air was thick with the dry, papery scent of history and secrets. Moonlight struggled through a single grimy window high on the wall. "He will go straight to your Alpha," Rhys said, his voice a low, intense whisper. "And Valerius will see this as an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" Anya's voice trembled. "To remove a king he doesn't like," Rhys answered, his golden eyes grim. He began to pace the narrow aisle between shelves. "There are Alphas on the council who believe the old ways are a weakness. They fear the power of true blood. They see our gifts as a threat to their own brute strength. They would rather have a puppet on the throne than a true king." He stopped, turning to face her. "I have allies, of course. Alphas loyal to my family for generations. My advisors—" He listed a few names, but they were just sounds to Anya, meaningless titles. Then he said a name that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. "And Lord Kalen of the Red Creek Pack. He has been my father's most trusted confidant for 30 years. A chill, slick and oily, slithered down Anya's spine. The name seemed to hang in the air, rotten and wrong. Without thinking, she reached out with her gift, focusing not on a person but on the connection Reese had to that name. She didn't see a vision, but she felt it. A deep, profound wrongness. A black, coiling deceit hidden behind a mask of loyalty. It felt like a smiling face with poison on its tongue. "No," she breathed out, the word escaping before she could stop it. Reese froze, his brow furrowed. "No?" She took a shaky step forward, her own fear battling with a fierce protective instinct she didn't know she possessed. "Lord Kalen," she said, her voice stronger now, more certain. "He's a liar. The image you have of him, it's a carefully crafted illusion. Beneath it, there's darkness, greed." She looked him directly in the eye, praying he would believe her. "You can't trust him." He stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning horror. This was it, the first true test of his faith in her, in the very gift he had sought for so long. Her entire life, this ability had brought her nothing but pain and fear. Now, the life of a king depended on it. Before he could respond, before he could choose to believe or dismiss her, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the stone corridor outside. They stopped directly in front of the archive door. They were trapped. Chapter 8. The Alpha's Gauntlet. The heavy wooden bar on the door handle began to lift. Reese pushed Anya behind a towering shelf of scrolls, shielding her with his body just as the door creaked open. It wasn't a guard. It was Lyra. Her eyes, glittering with suspicion, scanned the dusty room before landing on the king. "There you are," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "My father was asking for you. He wishes to discuss the trade routes." It was a flimsy excuse, a summons disguised as a request. She shot a look of pure venom over Reese's shoulder at Anya before turning, expecting him to follow. He gave Anya's arm a slight, reassuring squeeze before he left, his expression once again an unreadable mask of royalty. Anya was left alone in the suffocating silence, the danger now a living thing, breathing down her neck. She waited until the footsteps faded, before slipping out and making her way back to the kitchens, her mind racing. An hour later, as she was scrubbing a large iron pot, the confrontation she dreaded finally came. Alpha Valerius stormed into the main hall where she was working, two of his largest guards flanking him. "Omega!" he bellowed, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. Anya froze, her heart seizing in her chest. "I have been told," he said, stalking toward her, "that you were seen sneaking from the kitchens last night with a bundle of food." He stood over her, his shadow a suffocating blanket. "Food that belongs to the pack. Are you a thief as well as a burden?" It was a lie. A pathetic, transparent lie designed to humiliate and punish her for being seen with the king. The guards moved to grab her. Anya squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. "That will be enough, Valerius?" The voice was not loud, but it cut through the hall with the chilling finality of a headsman's axe. King Reese stood at the entrance to the hall, his arms crossed over his chest. He moved with a lethal grace, his golden eyes fixed on Valerius, burning with a cold fire that promised violence. "The Omega was with me," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl that made the guards hesitate. "She was seeing to a task I set for her." He came to a stop beside Anya, placing himself between her and her alpha. "From this moment on, she is under my personal protection. If you or any of your wolves so much as look at her incorrectly, you will answer directly to me. Is that understood?" The hall was utterly silent. It was a direct challenge. A king putting his authority on the line for a worthless Omega. Valerius's face purpled with rage, but he was powerless. He couldn't defy the king, not openly. He gave a stiff, jerky nod. "As you wish, Your Majesty." The words were choked with hatred. In the tense standoff, as Valerius trembled with barely suppressed fury, Anya noticed it. His right hand, clenched into a fist at his side, was twitching uncontrollably. The skin around his knuckles had a strange sallow tint to it, a sickly yellow-gray she recognized from her herbal studies. It was the telltale sign of a slow-acting poison derived from wolfsbane root. A new, terrifying thought took root in her mind. He wasn't just a tyrant. He was a victim, or something far, far worse. Chapter 9. The Ledger and the Lie. The image of Valerius's twitching hand haunted her. Poison. The thought was a relentless drumbeat in her mind. She couldn't just wait for Reese to protect her, she had to act. That night, when the pack house was deep in slumber, Anya slipped from her small cot. She was a creature of the shadows, her entire life a study in how to move unnoticed. She knew the creaky floorboards, the patterns of the guards' patrols, the secret ways to get from one end of the sprawling house to the other. Her destination, Alpha Valerius's private office. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and old leather, the scent of a man trying to project power. The heavy oak desk was littered with maps and decrees. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each creak of the house sounding like a shout in the oppressive silence. Where would he hide something? She closed her eyes, pushing aside her fear and reaching out with her gift. She didn't look for auras, but for intent, for the lingering feeling of secrecy and deceit. Her senses pulled her toward the desk, not the drawers, but below it. Kneeling, her fingers traced the rough-hewn floorboards until they found it, one that was slightly loose. Prying it up with her fingernails, she revealed a shallow cavity, and inside, a leather-bound ledger. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The book was filled with neat, precise columns of numbers and names. Her blood ran cold. It was a detailed record of transactions, shipments of pack silver, timber from their sacred groves, winter pelts, all sold to rogue factions, the sworn enemies of the established packs. Valerius was arming their enemies, betraying his own kind for profit. This was treason. And then she saw it. Tucked between the last two pages was a folded piece of parchment. She carefully unfolded it. It was a map. A map of the road leading away from their territory, back toward the King's lands. And marked on it, in blood-red ink, was an X. Ambush. They were planning to kill Reese on his journey home. This was the proof, the absolute, undeniable proof of a conspiracy that went far beyond her own pack. Clutching the ledger and the map to her chest, she felt a surge of triumph mixed with terror. She had it. She could save him. A soft creak from the doorway made her entire body go rigid. She snapped her head up, her breath caught in her throat, expecting to see a guard with his sword drawn. But it wasn't a guard. Standing in the doorway, bathed in the pale moonlight, was Lyra. Her face was a mask of shock. But beneath the shock, Anya saw something else, something that made no sense at all. It wasn't anger. It wasn't triumph. It was raw, undiluted fear. Chapter 10. An Unexpected Confession. The world narrowed to the space between them. Anya, with the damning proof clutched in her hand. Lyra, with a storm of fear in her eyes. Anya braced herself for the inevitable scream, the call for guards, the triumphant smirk. It never came. Instead, Lyra took a quiet step back and pushed the heavy oak door shut, the soft click of the latch an impossible sound in the tense silence. "What are you doing?" Lyra whispered, her voice stripped of its usual venom, leaving behind a raw, trembling husk. She wasn't looking at the ledger. She was looking at Anya. With him. With the king. Anya's mind reeled in confusion. "What?" "I saw you," Lyra continued, her hands twisting in the fabric of her expensive dress. "On the balcony. He looked at you, the way he was supposed to look at me." Her carefully constructed mask of arrogance began to crumble, revealing the terrified girl beneath. "You're ruining everything." "Ruining what?" Anya asked, her own fear momentarily forgotten, replaced by a bewildering curiosity. Tears welled in Lyra's eyes, tracing clean paths through the powder on her cheeks. My father. He told me the truth weeks ago. Our pack is dying, Anya. The harvests are failing, the herds have moved on, and the rogue attacks are getting worse. We're bleeding silver just to survive. She took a ragged breath, the confession tumbling out of her in a desperate rush. He said the only thing that could save us, the only thing that could save our people, was an alliance with the king. A mating. My mating. She looked at Anya, her expression a heartbreaking mix of anger and pleading. I don't even like him, he's old and sad, but I was willing to do it for the pack, and now you, some nothing. You're taking away our only hope. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The poison, the desperation, the lies. Lyra wasn't a monster driven by ambition. She was a pawn, manipulated by her father's grand, treasonous scheme. He had fed her a story of salvation while he plotted murder. Anya looked down at the ledger in her hand, at the map marked with a blood-red X. This was the real story. This was the truth that would shatter Lyra's world far more than any failed mating. A flicker of something she never thought she'd feel for Lyra, pity stirred in her chest. Lyra, she began, holding out the book. That's not the truth. Your father... Before she could finish, the door burst open with a splintering crash. Alpha Valerius stood there, his face a thunderous mask of pure fury. His eyes darted from the ledger in Anya's hand to his daughter's tear-streaked face. He understood instantly, and he lunged. Chapter 11. The midpoint shift. Valerius's roar of fury was inhuman, but he didn't lunge for Anya. He backhanded his own daughter, the sickening crack of the blow echoing in the small office. Lyra crumpled to the floor, a cry of pain and shock torn from her lips. You foolish, sentimental girl, he snarled, standing over her. You've ruined everything. The commotion was a magnet for sound and fury. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hall. Rhys appeared in the doorway, his eyes blazing, and right behind him, Lord Kalin, his trusted advisor, his expression a mask of grave concern. Perfect timing. Too perfect. A cold dread washed over Anya. Valerius, what is the meaning of this? Rhys demanded, his voice ringing with authority. Cornered, exposed, with the evidence of his treason in the hands of his enemy, Valerius made his final, desperate move. Guards, he bellowed. Seize the king. He has been compromised by this Omega witch. He is no longer fit to rule. His loyal men, who had followed the sounds of the struggle, filled the doorway, their hands on the hilts of their swords. Rhys turned, expecting his advisor to stand with him to quell this pathetic rebellion. Kalin, I am sorry, Your Majesty, Lord Kalin said, and a slow, reptilian smile spread across his face. But Alpha Valerius is right. The words were a poisoned dagger in the heart of the night. Kalin turned to the uncertain guards. The king's judgment has been clouded. The curse has weakened his mind, and this Omega has finished the job. For the stability of the kingdom, he must be removed. Betrayal. Absolute and devastating. Rhys stared at the man who had been his father's friend, his own confidant, and in that moment of shocked stillness, Valerius's guards attacked. Rhys fought with the ferocity of a cornered lion, but he was outnumbered. And the curse was a poison in his veins, siphoning his strength. A heavy blow sent him to his knees, a pained grunt forced from his lips. He was overwhelmed, beaten. The game had changed. The threat wasn't just a greedy alpha. It was a coup, orchestrated by the man Rhys trusted most in the world. Kalin and Valerius turned their triumphant, hungry eyes to Anya. She was the loose end, the one who held the proof. Get the ledger, Kalin commanded, his voice cold and precise. A guard started toward her. Her world dissolved into a tunnel of pure animal terror. But just as the guard's hand reached for her, a blur of motion came from the floor. Lyra, Her face bruised, but her eyes blazing with a newfound terrible clarity, scrambled to her feet. She had seen her father's true face, had heard the depth of his treason, and she made a choice. With a guttural scream of defiance, she yelled, "Run!" Chapter 12. A Flight Through Darkness. Lyra's scream shattered the moment. She grabbed a heavy stone inkwell from the desk and hurled it at the closest guard. It struck him in the head with a sickening thud, and he went down. That single act of rebellion bought them 3 precious seconds. Rhys, seeing the opening, surged to his feet and slammed his shoulder into another guard, clearing a path. He grabbed Anya's hand. "Go!" They fled. They burst from the office and plunged into the labyrinth of the pack house, the shouts of angry men rising behind them. They didn't stop, didn't look back. They ran out a side entrance and into the suffocating darkness of the forest. The cold night air burned in Anya's lungs. Behind them, a horn sounded. The hunt was on. The terrifying baying howls of the warhounds echoed through the trees, a sound promising torn flesh and broken bones. Panic tried to claw its way up her throat, but she shoved it down. Panic was a luxury. Rhys was powerful, but he was a stranger in these woods. She was not. This was her sanctuary, and tonight it had to be her salvation. "This way," she gasped, pulling him off the main path and into the tangled undergrowth. She led him on a desperate, weaving path she had forged over years of secret explorations, over fallen logs slick with moss, through thorny thickets that tore at their clothes, across a shallow, babbling brook to cover their scent. The hounds grew closer, then farther away, then closer again. It was a terrifying dance in the dark. For what felt like an eternity, they ran, fueled by nothing but adrenaline and fear. Finally, they burst through a line of ancient pine trees and found themselves on a precipice. Below them, a river, swollen with recent rains, raged through a narrow gorge. It was too wide to jump, the current too strong to swim. They were trapped. Rhys leaned against a tree, his chest heaving, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The fight, the flight. The curse was consuming his remaining strength. Anya could see the faint, dark veins spreading on his skin, a visible mark of the poison in his blood. He was too weak to shift, too weak to fight, too weak to even cross the river. The sound of snapping branches and the low growls of the hounds told them their time was up. Torches flickered through the trees behind them, a constellation of approaching death. Valerius and his hunters were closing in. Rhys pushed himself off the tree, stumbling. He looked at Anya, his golden eyes filled with a desperate, ragged apology. "I can't," he choked out, his body trembling with exhaustion. "Anya, I can't." The king was broken, his strength was gone, and all that stood between him and the traitor's blade was her. Chapter 13. A Healer's Choice. The torches were getting closer, a ring of fire tightening around them in the oppressive dark. Rhys sagged against her, his weight a deadening anchor, the shallow rasp of his breath a terrifying drumbeat counting down their final seconds. The river roared beside them, a merciless churning maw. There was no escape. This was the end. Anya's mind went numb, a quiet, cold acceptance settling over her. This was how her story was always meant to finish, in darkness, hunted and alone. Rhys coughed, a racking, painful sound that brought her back to the horrifying present. He slid down the trunk of the tree, collapsing at its roots. "Anya!" he gasped, his golden eyes clouded with pain searching for hers. "The curse, it's not just a sickness, it's a poison." His voice was a threadbare whisper, nearly lost in the roar of the river. "It unspools the magic in our blood. My father died a shell of himself. I can feel it. Feel it happening to me now. It's faster than I thought." His kingly mask was gone completely, stripped away by pain and exhaustion. All that was left was a man, terrified and vulnerable, looking at her as if she were the last star in a dying sky. "The legends are true," he choked out, his hand weakly finding hers, his skin clammy and cold. "Only a true blood can heal the bloodline. Not just the king, but the magic itself. He squeezed her fingers with what little strength he had left. "You are my only hope." His words struck her harder than any physical blow. Hope. The weight of it was suffocating. All her life she had believed she was a curse, a blight, a worthless thing to be hidden away. Her power was a source of shame and terror, a monster she had to keep locked in the cellar of her soul. Now, this dying king was telling her it was salvation. The voices of her past screamed in her mind, "You are nothing, you are broken, you bring ruin." They were Valerius's words, Lyra's words. They were her own. How could she save anyone when she couldn't even save herself? She looked from his desperate, pleading face to the approaching lights. Valerius's men were almost upon them. She could let them come. She could surrender to the inevitable. Let the darkness take them both. It would be easy. It would be an end to the fear. But then she looked back at Rhys, at the flicker of light still burning in his golden eyes, the light from the howl, the light she had recognized as her own. And in that moment, a new voice, quiet but fierce, rose up from the depths of her soul. No, it was the voice of the girl who practiced fighting in secret, the voice of the woman who had dared to steal the truth from an alpha's office. It was the voice of her mother. Your blood is a river, not a puddle. She would not let them be erased. Just as Valerius and his hunters burst through the trees, their triumphant snarls filling the air, a new sound cut through the chaos. A low, guttural growl from the shadows along the riverbank. Figures emerged, their silhouettes lean and hungry. Their scent was wild, untamed, rogue. They weren't pack, and they were looking at the weakened king like a prize ripe for the taking. They were trapped, not between one enemy and the river, but between two. Chapter 14. Trial by Fire. A tense three-way standoff froze the night. Valerius's hunters, their faces illuminated by torchlight, snarled at the newcomers. The rogues, a ragged band of 5, snarled back, their eyes glowing with feral hunger. And in the middle, Anya and the fallen king. One of the rogues, a hulking brute with a scarred face, grinned, revealing yellowed fangs. "Well, well," he rasped, his eyes fixed on Rhys. "Look what we have here, a wounded lion. That crown will fetch a fine price." Valerius laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Be my guest. Kill him. Save us the trouble." He and his men held their position, forming a semicircle, effectively cutting off any escape. They would let the rogues do their dirty work. The scarred rogue lunged. Adrenaline, pure and potent, surged through Rhys. With a roar that was more pain than fury, he met the rogue's charge. He fought with the last dregs of his strength, a king defending his life with nothing but instinct and will. But the curse had stolen his grace, his speed. He was slow, his movements clumsy. He managed to throw the first rogue aside, but 2 more were on him instantly, their claws tearing at his leathers. Anya couldn't just watch. The choice she'd made moments before had been a silent promise, and now it demanded blood. She was not a warrior. She had no claws, no fangs, no training. But she had the forest. As one of the rogues circled Rhys, looking for an opening, Anya scooped up a handful of loose dirt and gravel and threw it directly in his face. He howled, clawing at his eyes, temporarily blinded. It was enough. A new fire lit inside her. She grabbed a thick, heavy branch from the ground, its weight solid and real in her hands. Another rogue turned on her, seeing her as easy prey. He lunged. She swung the branch with all her might, the wood connecting with his jaw with a sickening crack. He stumbled back, stunned. She didn't wait. She scrambled away, drawing his attention, leading him into a thicket of thorns she knew was there. Rhys, seeing his chance, dispatched the blinded rogue with a brutal, efficient strike. They were back to back now. The wounded king and the Omega servant. He was the sword, she was the shield. He fought with brute force, she with cunning. They moved together in a desperate, unrehearsed dance of survival, a seamless, instinctive team forged in the heart of the fire. The remaining rogues, seeing their packmates defeated and realizing this was more trouble than it was worth, hesitated. The scarred leader gave a final, hateful snarl, then melted back into the darkness, his remaining packmates following close behind. They were gone. A stunned silence fell over the riverbank. Valerius and his men stared, momentarily shocked by what they had just witnessed. But the victory was costly. Rhys swayed on his feet, his breath a ragged whistle. Anya looked down and saw it. The deep gash in his side, a wound he must have taken in the pack house, had been torn wide open. Blood, dark and slick, soaked through his tunic, steaming in the cold night air. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed into her arms, his life bleeding out onto the forest floor. Chapter 15. Confessions in a Cave. Valerius's shock was their only shield. Before he could order his men to advance, Anya acted. Fueled by a strength she didn't know she possessed, she hooked her shoulder under Rhys's arm and dragged him away from the river, away from the torchlight and back into the swallowing darkness of the trees. His body was a dead weight, his blood leaving a dark trail on the damp leaves behind them. Every step was agony, every breath a prayer. She half-dragged, half-carried him to a place she hadn't visited since she was a child, a place of sanctuary. Behind a thick curtain of ancient ivy that clung to a rock face was the narrow opening to a cave. She pulled him inside, into the cool, damp darkness. The air smelled of wet stone and earth. It was small, barely a hollow in the rock, but it was hidden. It was safe. For now. She gently lowered him to the ground. He was shivering, his skin feverish to the touch. With trembling hands, she tore strips from the bottom of her tunic and opened the small leather pouch she always carried. It was filled with the herbs she'd gathered just yesterday, in another lifetime. She worked quickly, her mother's lessons guiding her hands. She packed the wound with yarrow to stop the bleeding and crushed willow bark for the pain, her movements deft and sure. Rhys's eyes fluttered open. He was awake, watching her, his golden gaze clouded with pain but filled with a raw, wondering awe. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. As she tied the makeshift bandage around his waist, the tension, the fear, the impossible weight of the last few hours finally broke her. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, the confession a ragged, broken thing. Her tears finally fell, hot and silent. "I can't heal a curse. I'm not a savior. I'm just a broken Omega who knows a few herbs." He reached up, his hand surprisingly strong, and laid it over hers where it rested on his chest. His touch was a spark of warmth in the cold cave. "You are not broken," he rasped, each word an effort. His thumb brushed against her knuckles. "And you are not alone in your fear." He took a shuddering breath. "I am terrified, Anya. Terrified of this curse being my legacy, of dying alone in the dark, a failure to my ancestors." In the stillness of the cave, they were no longer a king and an Omega. They were just two souls, stripped bare, their secrets and fears laid out between them. Their bond, forged in treason and blood, was now sealed in a fragile, shared vulnerability. A quiet peace settled in the small space, a moment of reprieve in the heart of the storm. But the storm had not passed. As the first faint rays of dawn began to filter through the ivy at the cave's entrance, a new sound reached them. It wasn't the chaotic crashing of a chase. It was the organized, methodical call of a hunting party spreading out, sweeping the forest. It was the calm, commanding voice of Lord Kalen, directing the search. They weren't just being hunted anymore, they were being cordoned, found. Chapter 16. The Traitor's Gambit. The voice was calm, controlled, utterly without mercy. "Check behind the ivy," Lord Kalen commanded, his tone that of a man examining a mildly interesting rock. The sound was so close, just outside the thin curtain of leaves that separated their fragile sanctuary from their doom. There was nowhere left to run. Rhys, delirious with fever, tried to push himself up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Anya gently pushed him back down, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. The end had come. A rough hand tore the ivy curtain away. Morning light, harsh and unwelcome, flooded the small cave, forcing Anya to squint. They were exposed. Kalen strode in, his movements fluid and confident, a predator who knew the hunt was over. Valerius followed, his face a mask of smug triumph. His guards filled the entrance, blocking the only way out. "A noble effort, Your Majesty," Kalen said, his lips twisting into a pitying smile as he looked at Rhys. "Truly, hiding in a hole with your Omega pet, it's almost poetic." "Kalen," Rhys rasped, his voice barely audible. "Why?" The Lord chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Why? Because your time is over. Your bloodline is weak, sentimental. Your belief in ridiculous legends like True Bloods is a liability." He began to circle them, his monologue for an audience of one. "My plan was quite simple, really. I used Valerius's greed fanning the flames of his treason. He was the perfect pawn. He would arrange an ambush for you, and when your body was found— oh, the tragedy." Kalen clasped his hands together in mock grief. The beloved king, slain by rogues, led into a trap by his treacherous Omega courtesan. He stopped and looked directly at Valerius, whose triumphant smile was beginning to curdle into confusion. Then, of course, I would arrive. I would discover Valerius's treason, execute him for his crimes, and avenge my fallen king. The council, desperate for a strong leader in a time of crisis, would have no choice but to name me regent. The throne would be mine, and I would be hailed as a hero. The color drained from Valerius's face. "Pawn? You were working with me." "I was using you, you oaf," Kalen said with a dismissive wave. "And now, your part is played." He nodded to his own personal guards, who stepped forward and seized the sputtering, horrified alpha. It was a masterpiece of betrayal, layers deep. Realizing he was doomed, Valerius's eyes darted around wildly before landing on Anya, a cornered animal seeking a shield. With a desperate snarl, he lunged, grabbing her and pulling her in front of him, his thick arm locking around her throat. "Stay back," he screamed, his voice cracking. He pressed his face close to hers, his breath sour with fear. "Worthless Omega," he spat. "You brought this on us. You should have known your place." Chapter 17. The Fall of a King. Anya's world became a suffocating prison of Valerius's arm around her neck and the stench of his fear. She couldn't breathe. She could only watch as Rhys, seeing her in danger, reacted with the last defiant flicker of his royal fire. With a guttural roar of pure, protective rage, he launched himself from the ground, aiming for Kalen. It was the desperate final surge of a dying star, a magnificent, futile gesture. He was a ghost of himself, a king of shadow and memory. His movements, once impossibly swift, were now labored and slow. The curse had hollowed him out, and his wounds had drained the rest. He was running on nothing but love. And it was not enough. Lord Kalen didn't even seem concerned. He watched the attack with an expression of bored contempt, as if observing an insect buzzing toward him. With a grace that was almost insulting, he sidestepped Rhys's clumsy lunge. He didn't use a sword. He didn't even use his claws. He simply pivoted and drove the steel heel of his boot into Rhys's wounded side. The impact was sickening. Rhys cried out, a sharp, broken sound, and the last of his strength vanished. He crashed to the stone floor of the cave, his body skidding to a halt at Kalen's feet. He didn't try to get up again. He couldn't. His body convulsed once, a final, shuddering tremor, and then he lay still, his chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged breaths. The great Alpha King, the last of the Silver Throne bloodline, was defeated. Utterly and completely. He was at their mercy. Anya's heart stopped. No. 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 The word was a silent scream in her mind. This was it, the lowest point, the end of all hope. The nightmare she had been running from her entire life had finally caught her. Kalen looked down at the fallen king, his chest puffed with pride. He reached into his leather tunic and slowly, theatrically drew a long, slender dagger. The steel was dark, almost black, and it seemed to drink the light from the cave. His smile was the most terrifying thing Anya had ever seen. It was a smile of pure, absolute triumph, a smile that said, "I have won." He stood over Rhys's prone form, a dark angel of ambition preparing to deliver the final killing blow. He was going to execute him right there, on the cold, damp earth, and erase his bloodline from the world forever. Chapter 18. A scream in the silence time slowed to a thick, syrupy crawl. Anya saw everything with a horrifying, crystalline clarity. The cruel, elegant curve of Kaelin's dagger, the smug, triumphant twist of his lips, the faint, almost imperceptible mist of Rhys's last shallow breaths. He was going to die. Here. Now. And it was her fault. Valerius's words echoed in the sudden silence of her mind. "This is what happens when filth like you tries to rise." He was still holding her, his arm a band of iron, his words the final hammer blow meant to shatter her completely. And for a second, she believed him. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over her. She was a broken omega, a curse, a worthless thing who had dared to hope. This was her punishment. Kaelin raised the dagger high, the dark metal catching a single cruel beam of morning light, and something inside Anya broke. It was not her spirit. It was the dam, the great towering wall she had built around her soul, brick by painful brick, to hold back the raging river of her power. All the fear, all the shame, all the nights spent crying in silence, all the insults and bruises, every moment of quiet endurance and hidden defiance from her entire life coalesced into a single, white-hot point of pressure. And it exploded. A scream tore from her throat. It was not a scream of terror. It was not a plea for mercy. It was a sound that had not been heard in the world for centuries. It was the sound of a soul unbound. It was primal, ancient, and utterly terrifying. More than a sound, it was a shockwave, a physical blast of raw, untamed, true blood power that ripped through the cave and out into the clearing. Everything stopped. The dagger froze in Kaelin's hand, inches from Rhys's throat. The smug look on his face was replaced by one of stunned disbelief. Valerius's arm went slack around her neck, his jaw hanging open in shock. The guards at the cave entrance stumbled back, their hands flying to their ears, their faces pale with a sudden, superstitious dread. Even the leaves on the trees outside seemed to tremble. The pack members who had gathered, loyal to Valerius and to the king, all turned as one. They stared at the mouth of the cave, at the small gray figure of the Omega girl, now radiating an aura of such immense and terrifying power that it made their bones ache. She had been silent her entire life. But she had just found her voice, and it had the power to shatter worlds. Chapter 19. The Unveiling. The silence was a living thing. It rang in the air, heavy and absolute in the wake of her scream. Every wolf, guard, hunter, traitor was frozen, their eyes locked on Anya. The power that had erupted from her still thrummed in her veins, a wild, exhilarating hum that sang a song of fire and freedom. She was terrified, and she had never felt so alive. Kaelin recovered first. The shock in his eyes melted away, replaced by a dark, glistening avarice. His fear was overshadowed by his greed. "A true blood," he breathed, a rapacious smile spreading across his face. "More powerful than the legends ever claimed. She will be an even greater prize than the throne." He gestured with his dagger toward the guards. "Seize her! Carefully!" But the guards didn't move. They stared at Anya, their pack instincts, older and deeper than any loyalty to an alpha, screaming at them. They saw not an Omega, but an ancient power made flesh. Their feet were rooted to the ground by a primal, superstitious fear. This was a magic their claws and teeth could not touch. Seeing their hesitation, knowing she had only a moment, Anya focused. The power inside her was no longer a blunt, chaotic scream. It was a current she could now direct. She met Kaylin's greedy gaze, and she pushed. She didn't send a sound. She sent the truth. It flowed from her, an invisible, undeniable wave of pure knowledge. She projected the oily, black rot of his soul directly into the minds of every pack wolf in the clearing. They saw it. They felt it. A flash of Kaylin poisoning the old king's wine. A slow, patient murder. The visceral feeling of a cold blade of betrayal sliding into the back of a trusted friend. They experienced the chilling satisfaction he felt as he plotted Rhys's downfall, the contempt he held for them all. It wasn't a story she told them. It was a memory she gave them, their own. A collective gasp, a wave of revulsion, rippled through the assembled wolves. They recoiled from Lord Kaylin as if he were physically covered in filth. The expressions on their faces shifted from confusion to horrified understanding, and then to a simmering, righteous rage. In the space of a single breath, the power dynamic of the entire kingdom had been shattered. Kaylin was no longer a charismatic lord or a potential king. He was a monster, his soul laid bare for all to see. The guards who had been ready to die for him now looked at him with murder in their eyes. He was alone. And in that moment of absolute chaos, as Kaylin stared in disbelief at the ruin of his plans, Lyra made her move. Chapter 20. An Alliance of Scorned Daughters. With Kaylin's treachery exposed, the pack was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Lyra provided it. She didn't go to her father, still held captive by Kaylin's bewildered guards. She didn't run to the fallen king. She walked with a steady, newfound purpose and stood at Anya's side, the bruised Omega and the disgraced Alpha's daughter. An impossible alliance. He speaks the truth through her, Lyra's voice rang out, clear and strong, cutting through the stunned murmurs. All eyes turned to her. Last night I found the proof. My father's ledgers. He sold our pack's resources to rogues. He plotted with Kaylin to ambush and murder our king. She raised a trembling but resolute hand and pointed directly at the man who had raised her. My father, Alpha Valerius, is a traitor to this pack, and to the crown. The final nail in the coffin, a daughter's public condemnation. Valerius let out a strangled cry of denial, but no one was listening. The truth was a palpable force in the clearing, and it had chosen its champions. The two women, who had been rivals their entire lives, now stood together, a united front against the corrupt power that had sought to destroy them both. Anya, with her ancient, terrifying gift. Lyra, with her political legitimacy and a voice that the pack, for the first time, truly heard. It was enough. A figure moved from the crowd of pack members. Olda Lara, her face a mask of grim resolve, came and stood behind Anya. Then another wolf, a young hunter whose brother had been killed in a rogue attack, joined her. Then another, and another. Within moments, a protective circle had formed around Anya, Lyra, and the still-downed Rhys. The battle lines were no longer blurred. They were drawn in blood and betrayal. Kaylin saw it. He saw the loyalty shifting, the tide turning against him with unstoppable force. His plan was in ashes. But a cornered wolf is the most dangerous. A snarl ripped through his lips, his face contorting into a mask of pure, murderous rage. He no longer cared about the throne. He only wanted destruction. He turned to his own personal guards, the elite few whose loyalty was bought and paid for. "Kill them!" he roared, his voice cracking with madness. "Kill them all!" As Kaylin's guards drew their blades, Rhys stirred. He heard the call to battle. He saw Anya, standing as his champion. With a groan of pure, agonized effort, fueled by a spirit that would not be broken, he pushed himself onto one knee, then shakily to his feet. He was a wounded king, but he was still a king, and he would face his betrayer himself. Chapter 21. The Battle of Broken Will's chaos erupted. Kaylin's elite guards, killers loyal to coin rather than honor, crashed against the furious Black Moon pack. The clearing became a maelstrom of flashing steel, snarling wolves, and the brutal, visceral sounds of a civil war fought with tooth and claw. It was a desperate, bloody fight for the soul of the pack. Rhys, swaying on his feet, but his golden eyes blazing with righteous fire, ignored the larger battle. He had only one target. He stumbled toward Kaelin, his movements unsteady, but his purpose absolute. Their personal duel began, a clash of broken wills. Rhys was still weak, his parries slower than they should be, but he fought with the fury of a betrayed heart, a spirit that Kaelin's blade could not seem to touch. Anya was not a bystander. The girl who hid from shadows was gone. In her place was a warrior forged in the forest. She moved along the edges of the fight, a silent, deadly force. She saw a guard about to flank old Alara and kicked a loose rock into his path, sending him stumbling. She saw an opening in an enemy's defense and gave a sharp, bird-like call, drawing a Black Moon warrior's attention to the weakness. Her gift was no longer just about seeing souls. It was about seeing the entire battlefield, the lines of attack, the moments of vulnerability. She was a whisper of guidance, a shadow of intervention, turning the tide of a dozen small fights without landing a single blow herself. She was the opposite of the frail, invisible girl who polished floors. She was a battle strategist, a warrior of instinct, and her pack, seeing her, fought with a courage they didn't know they had. They were no longer fighting for their traitorous alpha or a distant king. They were fighting for the quiet Omega who had shown them the truth. The sight of her, a fierce and brilliant whirlwind of action, seemed to pour strength directly into Rhys. He roared, a true king's roar, and battered Kaelin's defenses with a renewed, impossible vigor. He disarmed his opponent with a brutal twist of his blade, the traitor's sword clattering uselessly to the ground. The raging battle seemed to hold its breath. The fighters on both sides paused, their attention drawn to the center of the clearing. The war had come down to this: the wounded king and the unmasked traitor circling each other bare-handed. The final desperate confrontation was about to be decided not with steel, but with blood and bone. Chapter 22. The King and the Omega. The world held its breath. The raging battle dwindled to a tense, watchful silence, the air thick with the scent of blood and ozone. All that mattered now was the space between the two alphas. Rhys, wounded and bleeding, stood with the straight spine of a king who had forgotten how to fall. Kaelin, unmarked but his face a mask of feral desperation, circled him like a hyena sizing up a lion. His plans were ash, his followers broken or captured. All he had left was hate. The fight exploded. It was not the elegant clash of blades, but a raw, brutal brawl of fists and bone. Kaelin was stronger, his body whole and uninjured. He drove Rhys back with a savage series of blows. Rhys stumbled, his knees buckling. His gaze, for a fraction of a second, found Anya's across the clearing. She met his eyes, and in that silent connection, she poured every ounce of her will, her hope, her newfound strength into him. "Fight!" her soul screamed. "Live!" It was like throwing fuel on a dying fire. Rhys roared, a sound of pure defiance, and launched himself back into the fray. He was weaker, but he was smarter. He fought with the desperation of a man who had something to live for. Anya watched, her own body tense, her gift a humming, living thing inside her. She felt Kaelin's intent before he acted. A feint to the left, a heavy blow from the right. A sharp, almost inaudible gasp escaped her lips a split second before the blow landed. It was enough. Rhys, hearing her, adjusted his stance, turning a devastating strike into a glancing one. Again and again they moved in this silent, impossible rhythm. She was his eyes, his instinct, a shield of foresight he couldn't see but could feel. But it wasn't enough. Kaelin's raw strength was too much. He broke through Rhys's guard and tackled him to the ground. He pinned him, his hands like claws of iron closing around Rhys's throat. This was it. The end. Rhys's face contorted, air stolen from his lungs. Anya's heart shattered. But then, something changed. As Kaelin squeezed the life from the king, a faint, ethereal light began to glow from Rhys's skin. It started at his chest and spread outwards, a soft, silver luminescence. It was the true blood magic. The ancient power, so close to being extinguished forever, was being called forth, reignited by Anya's fierce, unwavering belief in him. The curse, that cold, creeping poison, sizzled and recoiled from the light. It was breaking. Power, pure and overwhelming, surged through Rhys. With a shout that was not of a man but of a king reborn, he arched his back. He threw Kaelin off him as if he were a child's toy. He rose to his feet, no longer the wounded, stumbling survivor. The gash in his side was knitting itself closed. His golden eyes blazed with the light of 1,000 suns. The curse was gone. He stood, a true and terrible king, his aura a blinding inferno of restored power. Kaelin stared, his face a mask of utter terror. The legend he had dismissed was real, and it was about to unmake him. The final blow was swift, merciful. The battle was over. Rhys stood in the sudden, awed silence, a king victorious, and his burning gaze found Anya's. It was a look that held not just victory, but a universe of gratitude, of wonder, and of love. Chapter 23. A Kingdom Reborn. In the aftermath of the battle, a profound quiet settled over the clearing. The Black Moon Pack, their faces a mixture of awe and shame, parted like a river as Rhys walked toward Anya. He moved with a new grace, his wounds completely healed, the silver light of his restored magic now a calm, steady aura around him. He stopped directly in front of her, the silence stretching, thick with unspoken words. This moment, she realized, was more important than the battle itself. He didn't speak to her first. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the wolves of the pack that had been his captors and were now his subjects. His voice, when he spoke, was not the growl of a conqueror, but the clear, resonant tone of a true king. What happened here today was born of fear, he said, his eyes meeting those of Alara, of the young hunters, of the wolves who had once laughed at her. Fear of the unknown. Fear of what you did not understand. He wasn't accusing them. He was teaching them. I, too, was afraid of a curse that was destroying me. His gaze came back to rest on Anya, and his voice softened, filled with a raw reverence that made her heart ache. But I was saved, not by a warrior's blade or an alpha's strength. I was saved by a gift you scorned. I was saved by a truth you refused to see. I was saved by her. He gestured to Anya, and for the first time the pack looked at her not as an omega, but as their salvation. He turned back to her then, and the world seemed to shrink until it was only the two of them. He reached out, his hands so gentle, and cupped her face. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. In front of everyone, the wolves who had abused her, the daughter who had despised her, he looked into her eyes and spoke the words that would reshape their world. "You are my healer," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My truth. My heart." He paused, then declared with a certainty that shook her to her very soul, "My queen." Before she could even process the word, he lowered his head to the juncture of her neck and shoulder. She felt the warmth of his breath, a soft sound of possession and promise, and then a brief, sharp pressure. A claim, a bond, ancient and unbreakable, snapped into place between them, a golden thread of light weaving their souls together. He had marked her as his mate, his Luna, his equal. For a moment, there was only stunned silence, and then, one wolf, then another, then the entire pack, threw their heads back and howled. It was not a sound of war or grief. It was a cheer, a joyous, uninhibited, soul-shaking roar of acceptance for their new Luna. Anya, the girl who had spent a lifetime praying to be invisible, closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her, a tide of hope for a world reborn. Chapter 24. The Luna's Law. Months later, the Great Hall was unrecognizable. The dark, imposing tapestries depicting battles and hunts had been replaced with woven histories of healing and growth. Sunlight, once a mere suggestion through grimy windows, now poured through clean glass, illuminating a space filled not with fear, but with a quiet, bustling purpose. Anya stood on the dais beside Reese, no longer a shadow at his side, but a confident ruler in her own right. She looked out at the faces of the pack, her pack, and her voice was calm and clear as it filled the hall. For too long, our strength has been measured only by the sharpness of our claws and the power of our alphas, she began. Today, we measure it by the kindness we show to our most vulnerable. She unrolled a scroll. I declare this to be the Luna's Law, she said, her gaze sweeping the room. No pack member, be they Omega, Elder, or Pup, will ever go hungry. No pack member will ever be denied shelter or medical care. Abuse of a subordinate is an act of treason against the pack itself, punishable by exile. A murmur of approval went through the crowd. She had taken the pain of her past and forged it into a shield for everyone else. Furthermore, she continued, her voice gaining strength, we will create a sanctuary, a home, for any true blood who has lived in fear, as I have. She met the eyes of a few new faces in the crowd, shy, nervous wolves who had answered her call from distant lands. Here, you will not be a curse. You will be a gift. You will learn the truth of your power, and you will help us build a better world. Lyra, her face free of its old arrogance, now filled with a quiet sense of duty, stepped forward. I will oversee the sanctuary, she said, her voice steady. It will be my honor. The disgraced daughter had found her own path to redemption, not through a crown, but through service. Later that evening, Anya and Reese walked hand in hand through the moonlit packlands. Pups tumbled in the grass where warriors once trained. The scent of baking bread drifted from the kitchens. Wolves greeted their Luna with smiles and respectful nods, not with fear. Anya leaned her head against Reese's shoulder, a true, contented smile gracing her lips for the first time she could remember. She was no longer defined by her scars. She was defined by the love she had found, the strength she had claimed, and the hope she had built from the ashes of her past. She was home. She was free. And in the quiet peace of the night, she could already feel the faint, tiny spark of a new life, a new legacy, growing within her, a child of a new dawn.